Crassus and the Dream of Glory. The Battle of Carrhae, the day Rome was humiliated. For nearly 300 years, Rome had marched from one victory to another. Its legions had crushed rival kingdoms, destroyed mighty Carthage, conquered Greece, subdued Spain, expanded across North Africa. No enemy seemed capable of stopping the relentless advance of the Roman Republic. Where Roman standards appeared, cities surrendered. Kings negotiated. Empires trembled. Across the Mediterranean, one belief had become almost unquestionable. Rome could not be defeated. Its armies were the finest in the known world. Its discipline unmatched. Its commanders celebrated as military geniuses. Generation after generation, Roman soldiers returned home carrying trophies, gold, and stories of glorious victories. Defeat existed, but never on a scale capable of shaking the Republic itself. Then one man decided that military glory could be bought. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was already the richest man in Rome. Soon, he would risk everything to become its greatest conqueror. Instead, he would lead thousands of Roman soldiers into one of the greatest disasters in Roman history. The richest man in Rome. Before Crassus became famous as a general, he was already legendary for another reason. His wealth. Ancient writers struggled to calculate just how rich he truly was. His fortune came from land, silver mines, investments, trade, and opportunities that others often considered too dangerous, or too cruel. One story, repeated by several ancient authors, tells of Crassus creating his own private firefighting force. When a building caught fire in Rome, his men rushed to the scene. But they did not immediately extinguish the flames. Instead, Crassus negotiated with the desperate owner. If the owner agreed to sell the burning property for a fraction of its value, Crassus bought it. Only then did his firefighters begin their work. Whether every detail of this story is true remains debated. But it perfectly reflects his ancient reputation. A man who saw opportunity where everyone else saw disaster. Piece by piece, he accumulated enormous wealth. Eventually, he owned hundreds of properties across Rome. His fortune surpassed nearly everyone alive. Yet despite all his money, something remained beyond his reach. Glory. Living in the shadow of giants. Crassus lived during one of the most extraordinary periods in Roman history. It was an age filled with remarkable men. Pompey the Great had conquered vast territories in the east. He celebrated magnificent triumphs through the streets of Rome. Crowds cheered his victories. His name became famous throughout the Republic. Then there was Julius Caesar. Brilliant. Charismatic. Fearless. His campaigns in Gaul transformed him into Rome's greatest military hero. Every new victory expanded both his reputation and his political power. Crassus possessed more money than either man. But history rarely remembers wealth. It remembers conquest. And every triumph celebrated by Pompey or Caesar reminded Crassus of something painful. He had no great military legacy. He had riches. They had immortality. Spartacus was not enough. There had been one moment when Crassus briefly tasted military success. The revolt of Spartacus. In 73 BC, thousands of enslaved gladiators and escaped slaves rose against Rome. Led by Spartacus, they repeatedly defeated Roman armies. The Republic faced humiliation. Eventually, Crassus received command. Through strict discipline and relentless pressure, he finally crushed the rebellion. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning to anyone considering another uprising. Officially, Crassus had ended the greatest slave revolt in Roman history. Yet even this victory failed to satisfy him. Why? Because another man received much of the public credit. Pompey returned to Italy just as the rebellion ended. Although Crassus had already broken Spartacus' army, Pompey claimed that he had finished the remaining fugitives. The Roman people applauded both commanders. But Crassus believed history had once again overlooked him. It was another reminder that victory alone was not enough. He wanted greatness. Undisputed greatness. The First Triumvirate. In 60 BC, Roman politics changed dramatically. Three of the Republic's most powerful men formed an informal political alliance. Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together, they became known as the First Triumvirate. Each possessed something the others needed. Caesar had unmatched popularity. Pompey commanded enormous military prestige. Crassus controlled immense financial resources. For a time, the alliance dominated Roman politics. But beneath the surface, rivalry never disappeared. Caesar continued winning victories in Gaul. Pompey remained celebrated across the Republic. Crassus watched both men build lasting reputations while his own achievements seemed increasingly forgotten. Money could purchase influence. It could not purchase admiration. Only military glory could do that. Looking east. If Crassus wanted to equal Caesar and Pompey, he needed a great war. Fortunately for him, one stood waiting beyond Rome's eastern frontier. The Parthian Empire. Stretching across modern Iran and Mesopotamia, Parthia controlled enormous wealth. Its cities prospered through trade linking east and west. Caravans carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and luxury goods crossed its territory. It was one of the few powers large enough to rival Rome itself. Yet unlike many of Rome's previous enemies, Parthia had never been conquered. To Crassus, this represented opportunity. If he defeated the Parthians, his name would stand beside Alexander the Great. Beside Pompey. Beside Caesar. Perhaps even above them. He imagined new provinces. Immense treasure. A magnificent triumph through Rome. History remembers ambition. But it also remembers overconfidence. Warnings ignored. Not everyone supported the campaign. Many senators argued there was no reason to invade Parthia. The Parthians had not attacked Rome. No immediate threat existed. Why begin a dangerous war simply for personal glory? Some politicians openly accused Crassus of greed. Others warned that the gods opposed the expedition. Ancient historians describe disturbing omens. Unfavorable sacrifices. Dark prophecies. Religious officials reportedly questioned whether the campaign should proceed at all. One Roman tribune is even said to have publicly cursed Crassus as he departed the city. Whether these stories became more dramatic over time is impossible to know. Ancient writers often enjoyed emphasizing bad omens before famous disasters. Still, the warnings reflected genuine concern. Many Romans believed this war was unnecessary. Crassus ignored them all. Crossing the Euphrates. In 54 BC, the campaign finally began. Thousands of Roman legionaries marched east. The Euphrates River marked the traditional frontier between Roman influence and the lands controlled by Parthia. Crossing it carried enormous symbolic meaning. This was no defensive operation. It was an invasion. The legions advanced into unfamiliar territory. At first, everything appeared encouraging. Several towns surrendered without resistance. Supplies seemed plentiful. The enemy remained strangely quiet. Crassus interpreted this silence as weakness. Perhaps the Parthians feared Rome. Perhaps they intended to avoid battle entirely. Each peaceful day strengthened his confidence. But the silence had another explanation. The Parthians were waiting. A better plan rejected. While Crassus prepared his invasion, an important offer arrived. King Artavasdes II of Armenia proposed an alliance. He urged Crassus to march north through Armenia instead of crossing the open plains of Mesopotamia. The Armenian king promised additional troops, particularly cavalry, and argued that the mountainous terrain would greatly reduce the effectiveness of the Parthian horse archers. It was sound military advice. A slower route, perhaps. But a safer one. Crassus refused. He wanted the fastest path toward glory. The wide plains of Mesopotamia seemed perfect for a rapid advance. He believed his disciplined legions could defeat any army they encountered. The decision would prove catastrophic. A general named Surina. Far to the east, another commander quietly prepared. His name was Surina. Unlike Crassus, Surina is less well known today. Yet ancient historians described him as one of the greatest military leaders of the Parthian Empire. Young. Exceptionally wealthy. A brilliant cavalry commander. He understood Roman warfare. More importantly, he understood its weaknesses. Surina had no intention of meeting the Roman legions on their terms. He would force them to fight his battle. On his battlefield. Under his conditions. And before Crassus realized what was happening, the fate of his army would already be sealed. As the Roman column pushed deeper into the endless plains of Mesopotamia, the landscape slowly began to change. Villages became scarce. The rivers grew farther apart. The heat intensified. Dust hung constantly in the air. Still, there was no sign of the enemy. Only endless silence. The legionaries believed they were marching toward victory. In reality, they were marching into a trap that had been carefully prepared long before they crossed the Euphrates. Into the desert. The Battle of Carrhae, the day Rome was humiliated. The deeper the Romans marched into Mesopotamia, the quieter the world became. The fertile lands near the Euphrates slowly disappeared behind them. The villages grew fewer. The trees became smaller. Even the birds seemed to vanish. Ahead lay an endless sea of dry plains stretching toward the horizon. Every direction looked exactly the same. The sun climbed higher each day, turning the landscape into a furnace. The soldiers had expected a great battle. Instead, they found silence. An unsettling silence. Because somewhere beyond the shimmering heat, an enemy they had never seen was already watching their every movement. A land the Romans did not understand. Roman legions were masters of many battlefields. They had conquered mountains in Spain. Dense forests in Gaul. Rocky hills in Greece. Cities protected by massive walls. But Mesopotamia was different. This land offered almost no natural protection. No forests to hide within. No hills to control. No rivers nearby once the army moved away from the Euphrates. Only open ground. Flat. Dry. Endless. To Roman commanders, it appeared ideal. A perfect place for disciplined infantry formations. What Crassus failed to understand was that the same open terrain also favored another army. One built almost entirely around speed. The heat becomes an enemy. By midday, the temperature became unbearable. The iron helmets absorbed the blazing sunlight. Armor grew hot against the skin. Sweat soaked through wool tunics. Dust clung to every exposed surface. Water became the most valuable possession in the army. Each soldier carried only a limited supply. As the hours passed, men drank carefully, knowing there might not be another chance before nightfall. Lips cracked. Throats burned. The weight of armor seemed heavier than ever. Even experienced veterans began showing signs of exhaustion. Yet the march continued. Roman discipline allowed no alternative. Orders were followed. Columns remained organized. Standards continued moving eastward. Still, the enemy remained invisible. Shadows on the horizon. Occasionally, scouts reported movement in the distance. A few riders appeared briefly before disappearing again. Sometimes they watched from miles away. Sometimes they vanished behind clouds of dust. The Roman cavalry attempted pursuit several times. Every attempt failed. The mysterious horsemen always disappeared before contact could be made. Crassus dismissed the reports. Small patrols. Nothing more. He believed the main Parthian army was retreating. Perhaps they feared open battle. Perhaps they planned to defend one of their cities farther east. Every passing day strengthened his confidence. He believed he was advancing deeper into enemy territory. In reality, the enemy was drawing him exactly where they wanted him. The betrayal of Arians. Ancient historians describe another critical mistake. A local Arab chieftain named Arians, who had previously maintained friendly relations with Rome, offered to guide Crassus through the region. He claimed he knew the quickest route to the Parthians. His advice seemed helpful. His confidence reassuring. Crassus accepted. According to ancient sources, Arians deliberately led the Roman army away from the safer routes near the Euphrates and deeper into the exposed plains. Whether he acted from loyalty to Parthia, personal ambition, or political calculation remains uncertain. But the result was devastating. The Romans found themselves farther from reliable water. Farther from reinforcements. Farther from escape. Every mile made the army more vulnerable. The army begins to doubt. Ordinary legionaries sensed something was wrong. The march had become unusually difficult. No enemy appeared. No major cities blocked their advance. No supplies were captured. Only dust. Heat. And uncertainty. Some officers quietly questioned the route. Others suggested returning toward the river. But Crassus refused. Turning back now, he believed, would appear weak. He had come to win glory. Not to retreat before seeing the enemy. Pride can become dangerous on any battlefield. In the desert. It can become fatal. Surinna waits. While the Romans struggled beneath the relentless sun, Surinna remained remarkably calm. The Parthian commander had no intention of attacking too early. He knew his greatest advantage. Patience. His army was unlike anything Rome had faced before. Instead of heavy infantry standing shoulder to shoulder, it consisted primarily of cavalry. Fast. Disciplined. Highly trained. The majority were mounted archers capable of firing accurately even while riding at full speed. Supporting them were heavily armored cataphracts. Horsemen covered almost entirely in metal. Their horses protected by armor as well. Armed with long lances, they could shatter exhausted infantry once the moment was right. Surinna had carefully chosen the battlefield. Open plains. No obstacles. Now he simply waited for Crassus to arrive. The secret weapon. There was another advantage the Romans never anticipated. Supply. Most ancient armies eventually exhausted their arrows during prolonged fighting. Surinna solved this problem brilliantly. Behind his cavalry traveled hundreds of camels loaded with enormous reserves of arrows. Whenever mounted archers emptied their quivers, fresh ammunition arrived within minutes. This meant the Parthians could continue firing almost indefinitely. Roman soldiers had never encountered such a system before. They assumed the enemy would eventually run out of missiles. That assumption would prove disastrous. Dust on the horizon. Late one afternoon, the Roman scouts returned with urgent news. The enemy had finally been found. Far ahead. A massive cloud of dust slowly rose above the plains. At first, it was difficult to judge its size. Then sunlight flashed against metal. Horsemen. Hundreds. No. Thousands. The army halted. Centurions shouted orders. Standards moved into position. The familiar routines of battle began. Many legionaries felt relief. At last. After weeks of marching, the waiting was over. Few realized they were about to face an army unlike any Rome had ever encountered. Crassus makes his decision. Several experienced officers advised caution. They suggested waiting until the following morning, allowing exhausted soldiers time to rest, finding stronger defensive ground. Crassus hesitated, then rejected the advice. He feared the Parthians might escape during the night. Another opportunity for glory might disappear. He ordered the army to prepare for battle immediately. The Roman formation slowly advanced across the plain. Shields locked together. Standards held high. The discipline of centuries moved forward with confidence. Somewhere ahead, Surina watched quietly. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. The drums of Parthia. As the distance between the armies narrowed, something unexpected echoed across the desert. A deep, thunderous rhythm. Boom. 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 The Parthians began beating enormous war drums covered with animal hides. Ancient writers claimed the sound rolled across the plain like distant thunder. Many Roman soldiers had never heard anything like it. It was louder than shouting, slower than marching, almost hypnotic. The noise echoed through helmets and breastplates. Some later described it as sounding like the heartbeat of the desert itself. The psychological battle had already begun. Before a single arrow had been fired, Surina wanted the Romans to understand one thing. This would not be an ordinary battle. As the drums continued to shake the air, the dust slowly settled. For the first time, the Romans could clearly see the enemy standing before them. There were no massive ranks of infantry. No towering siege engines. No defensive walls. Only horsemen. Fast-moving cavalry spread across the open plain. Many Roman soldiers smiled. Surely cavalry alone could never defeat the greatest infantry in the world. Within the next few hours, that confidence would disappear forever. The Battle of Carrhae. The day Rome was humiliated. At first, many Roman soldiers smiled. The army standing before them looked small. There were no endless ranks of infantry. No towering siege engines. No massive shield walls. No disciplined formations like their own. Only horsemen. They rode across the plain in loose groups, constantly moving, never standing still. Some carried long lances. Most carried bows. To experienced Roman legionaries, it seemed almost ridiculous. How could cavalry defeat Rome's finest infantry? For generations, Roman soldiers had crushed armies built around mounted warriors. Surely this battle would end the same way. Crassus believed victory was only hours away. Instead, he had marched into one of the greatest military traps of the ancient world. Surina's army. The Parthian commander, Surina, knew he could never defeat Rome by fighting like the Romans. So he refused to try. His army was built around speed. Nearly every soldier fought on horseback. The majority were mounted archers. These were not ordinary cavalry. From childhood, many Parthian horsemen had learned to ride almost as naturally as they walked. They could guide their horses using only their knees. This allowed both hands to control a powerful composite bow. They fired while riding forward. They fired while turning. They fired while retreating. Some could even twist completely around in the saddle and shoot accurately behind them while galloping away. The famous maneuver later became known as the Parthian shot. To the Romans, it seemed almost impossible. The Roman formation. Crassus arranged his army into a large hollow square. It was a defensive formation designed to protect every side from cavalry attacks. Thousands of legionaries locked their shields together. Archers and cavalry occupied supporting positions. From a distance, the formation looked nearly invincible. It had one major weakness. It could not move quickly. The Romans had sacrificed mobility for protection. Surina immediately recognized the opportunity. His horse archers began circling the formation. Never coming close enough for Roman swords. Always staying just beyond reach. Then. The first arrows flew. A storm of iron. At first, the Romans barely reacted. Arrows were nothing new. Roman soldiers had faced archers before. Normally, an enemy could fire only for a limited time before running out of ammunition. The legionaries simply raised their shields. They expected the attack to end soon. It didn't. Another wave came. Then another. Then another. The sky seemed filled with arrows. They struck shields. Armor. Helmets. The ground. Some soldiers fell immediately. Others cried out in pain as arrows pierced exposed arms, legs, and faces. Still. The bombardment continued. Minutes passed. Then hours. The arrows never stopped. The Romans could hardly believe it. How could the enemy possibly carry so many? They could not see the answer waiting behind the Parthian lines. Camel after camel loaded with fresh bundles of arrows. Every time a horse archer emptied his quiver, another arrived. The rain of missiles continued without interruption. The testudo. Roman officers ordered one of their most famous defensive formations. The testudo. The turtle. Soldiers raised their shields overhead while others protected the sides. Together they formed a living shell of wood and iron. Against ordinary missile attacks, the formation was remarkably effective. Most arrows bounced harmlessly away. But there was a terrible cost. The formation barely moved. The soldiers became packed tightly together. The heat inside grew unbearable. Breathing became difficult. Sweat poured into their eyes. Worst of all, the Romans had surrendered the initiative. They were no longer attacking. They were surviving. And Surina knew exactly what would happen next. A desperate charge. Crassus realized his army could not remain under constant attack forever. Someone had to drive the horse archers away. He turned to the man he trusted most. His son. Publius Crassus. Unlike his father, Publius had already earned genuine military respect while serving under Julius Caesar in Gaul. He was brave. Popular with the soldiers. An experienced cavalry commander. Crassus ordered him to lead a force of cavalry, supported by infantry and archers, against the Parthian horsemen. The mission seemed simple. Break their attack. Force them into close combat. Restore Roman momentum. Publius accepted without hesitation. His cavalry surged forward. The Parthians immediately began to retreat. Exactly as Surina intended. The trap closes. The Roman cavalry pursued eagerly. The retreat looked genuine. The enemy seemed to be fleeing. But with every passing minute, Publius rode farther from the main Roman army. The dust became thicker. Visibility worsened. Soon. The Romans could no longer see Crassus' main force. Only then did the Parthians stop running. Without warning, they turned. Mounted archers surrounded the Romans from every direction. Arrows poured into the trapped cavalry. Whenever Publius attempted to charge, the horse archers simply rode away. Then turned again. Then fired another deadly volley. The Romans could neither catch them nor escape them. The cataphract strike. When Surina judged that the Romans had been weakened enough, he unleashed his final weapon. The cataphracts. These were among the most heavily armored cavalry in the ancient world. The riders wore iron armor from head to toe. Their horses were protected by armor as well. Each carried a massive lance designed to shatter infantry formations. As they charged, the earth shook beneath pounding hooves. The exhausted Roman cavalry had nowhere left to run. The impact was devastating. Horse after horse crashed into the Roman line. Lances pierced shields. Armor. Men. Chaos erupted. The surviving Romans fought desperately. But they were surrounded. The death of Publius. Publius Crassus refused to surrender. Ancient historians describe him continuing to fight even after the battle had clearly been lost. Eventually, wounded and facing capture, he chose death over imprisonment. Different ancient sources describe his final moments slightly differently, but all agree that he died during the battle. For Surina, this was more than a military victory. It was a psychological weapon. According to ancient accounts, Publius' head was cut off and carried across the battlefield. The Parthians displayed it where the main Roman army could see. When Crassus recognized his son's face, the battle changed forever. Imagine standing in formation. Already exhausted. Already surrounded. Then seeing proof that your commander's son had been killed. Roman morale collapsed. A legion breaking. Until that moment, the legionaries had remained disciplined. Now, fear spread. Not panic. Not yet. But doubt. The arrows still fell. The horse archers continued circling. The cataphracts waited for every weakness. Roman officers shouted themselves hoarse trying to maintain order. Some soldiers attempted desperate charges. The Parthians simply retreated. Then turned. Then fired. Again. And again. The Romans realized they were fighting an enemy they could not reach. Every lesson they had learned about warfare suddenly seemed useless. The greatest infantry in the world had become trapped in a battle where infantry could barely fight. Night falls. As darkness approached, Surina finally withdrew. Not because he had been defeated. Because he had already won. The battlefield was covered with Roman dead and wounded. Thousands lay motionless beneath the fading light. The survivors gathered in exhausted silence. Many had wounds that could not be properly treated. Others searched desperately for missing friends. No songs were heard. No celebrations. Only the quiet groans of injured soldiers echoing across the desert. Crassus looked over what remained of his once proud army. The legions that had crossed the Euphrates dreaming of glory were now broken. But the greatest humiliation was still waiting. Because morning would force Crassus to make one final decision. Fight again. Or try to escape. Either choice would change Roman history forever. The fall of Crassus. The Battle of Carrhae, the day Rome was humiliated. The first rays of sunlight revealed the true cost of the disaster. Bodies lay scattered across the plain. Broken shields. Abandoned standards. Dead horses. Thousands of Roman soldiers who had marched into Mesopotamia believing they were about to win another glorious victory would never see Italy again. The desert was silent. Only the wounded broke the stillness. Some called for water. Others whispered the names of friends who would never answer. The army that had crossed the Euphrates with confidence no longer resembled the proud legions of Rome. It had become a shattered force struggling simply to survive. A night of confusion. Throughout the night, Crassus and his officers argued over what to do next. Some wanted to attack before dawn. Others insisted that the army should retreat immediately. Every option carried enormous risk. The Parthians still controlled the open plains. Another full day of mounted archers could destroy what remained of the Roman army. Finally, the decision was made. Retreat. Quietly. Under the cover of darkness. The survivors abandoned many of their wounded because they simply could not carry everyone. It was one of the most painful decisions any Roman commander could face. As the army slipped away into the darkness, many injured soldiers were left behind. By morning, they would fall into Parthian hands. The long retreat. The Romans marched north toward the city of Carrhae, hoping its walls would provide temporary safety. The retreat was slow. The wounded struggled to keep pace. Many soldiers had thrown away equipment during the battle to make walking easier. Food was running low. Water remained scarce. Every cloud of dust on the horizon caused alarm. Was it another Parthian patrol? Or simply the desert wind? Exhaustion replaced discipline. Men who had once marched in perfect formation now staggered through unfamiliar country. Every mile felt longer than the last. Surina offers peace. Surina understood something important. Another battle might destroy the Romans completely. But capturing Crassus himself would be an even greater victory. He sent messengers offering negotiations. According to the Parthians, they wished to end the conflict peacefully. Many Roman officers immediately distrusted the proposal. They believed it was a trap. Others argued they had little choice. The army was exhausted. Another battle seemed hopeless. Crassus hesitated. His confidence had disappeared. The man who had crossed the Euphrates dreaming of conquest now found himself searching desperately for a way to save what remained of his army. A meeting that turned deadly. Eventually, Crassus agreed to meet the Parthian commanders. Ancient historians describe the meeting as tense from the very beginning. Exactly what happened next remains uncertain because different ancient sources provide slightly different accounts. According to the traditional version, confusion broke out almost immediately. Some Roman officers believed the Parthians were attempting to seize Crassus. Roman soldiers rushed forward. Parthian guards reacted. Shouting turned into fighting. Within moments, the negotiations had collapsed into violence. Crassus was killed. Whether he died resisting capture or in the chaos of the confrontation, one fact remains certain. The richest man in Rome lay dead in a foreign desert. His campaign had ended not with triumph, but with disaster. The legend of the molten gold. One of the most famous stories about Carrhae concerns Crassus' death. Several ancient writers claim that after he was killed, the Parthians poured molten gold into his mouth. The story symbolized his greed. It suggested that the man who always wanted more wealth had finally received all the gold he desired. It is an unforgettable image. But modern historians are cautious. There is no contemporary evidence confirming that this actually happened. Most scholars believe it is a later literary tradition, created to emphasize a moral lesson about ambition and greed rather than a verified historical event. Whether true or not, the legend survived because it perfectly matched the reputation Crassus had acquired in Roman history. The eagles are lost. Perhaps the greatest humiliation was not the death of Crassus. It was the loss of the legionary standards. Every Roman legion carried a sacred eagle known as the aquila. These silver or golden eagles were far more than military decorations. They represented the honor of the legion itself. To lose one in battle was almost unthinkable. At Carrhae, several Roman eagles fell into Parthian hands. The psychological impact in Rome was enormous. The Republic had lost not only soldiers. It had lost its honor. For decades, Romans remembered Carrhae every time they thought about the missing standards. Recovering them became a matter of national pride. The scale of the disaster. The numbers shocked the Roman world. Ancient sources estimate that around 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed. Approximately 10,000 more were captured. Many of those prisoners disappeared into the eastern reaches of the Parthian Empire. Some may have spent the rest of their lives serving far from home. Legions that had marched proudly beneath Roman banners simply ceased to exist. Few Roman defeats had ever been so complete. Carrhae joined the ranks of history's greatest military disasters. For the first time in generations, Rome had discovered an enemy capable of defeating its armies in open battle. Rome learns a hard lesson. News of the catastrophe spread quickly. Shock swept through the Republic. Crassus was dead. The army destroyed. The Eastern campaign had collapsed. But the consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. The first triumvirate effectively came to an end. Without Crassus acting as a political balance between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, tensions between the two surviving leaders grew rapidly. Within a few years, Rome would descend into civil war. In that sense, Carrhae changed more than military history. It helped reshape the political future of the Roman Republic itself. The return of the eagles. For more than 30 years, the lost standards remained in Parthian hands. Roman commanders dreamed of recovering them. Some launched campaigns seeking revenge. Others failed. Finally, in 20 BC, the Emperor Augustus achieved what armies had been unable to accomplish. Through diplomacy rather than war, he persuaded the Parthians to return the captured eagles. Across Rome, the event was celebrated as a great national victory. Temples displayed the recovered standards. Coins commemorated their return. The wounds of Carrhae had not been erased. But at last, Rome believed its honor had been restored. Final conclusion. The Battle of Carrhae was far more than a defeat. It shattered one of Rome's greatest illusions. For generations, the Republic had believed that disciplined infantry could overcome any enemy. Carrhae proved otherwise. It demonstrated that tactics, mobility, and leadership could overcome even the finest legions. Marcus Licinius Crassus began his campaign seeking immortality. He wanted his name to stand beside Alexander the Great, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. History remembered him. But not for the reasons he had imagined. His ambition led an entire army into a battlefield chosen by its enemy. His refusal to adapt turned confidence into catastrophe. His search for glory became one of Rome's greatest humiliations. Yet Carrhae also changed Rome. Future commanders studied the disaster carefully. They gained greater respect for cavalry. They became more cautious when fighting in unfamiliar terrain. They learned that no army, no matter how powerful, was invincible. Today, the exact location of the battlefield lies within the plains of modern southeastern Turkey, near the ancient city of Carrhae. The winds still sweep across the same open landscape. The desert remains silent. But beneath those quiet sands rests the memory of thousands of Roman soldiers who marched east believing they were carrying the future of an empire. Instead, they discovered the limits of Roman power. And they reminded history of a lesson that remains true in every age. The greatest danger facing any empire is not the strength of its enemies. It is the belief that it cannot be defeated.